I'd like to begin by saying hello, and my name is Mia. I'm calling in from Wajak Noongar Budja, Perth, in Western Australia, otherwise known as Bulu, the traditional proper name for this place. And I'd like to acknowledge that wherever we are today, throughout this space, that we're on stolen, unceded Indigenous lands. And I'm here on Bulu, and I pay my respects to Wajak elders, past and present, and the young ones coming through, and just extend that acknowledgement to any First Nations people that have joined us today. Thanks for coming. And I'd like to acknowledge that First Nations people are feeling the effects of climate crisis in the nuclear industry, first and worst, and that they've been on the front lines of this fight since the beginning, from uranium mining, nuclear waste threats, to now these nuclear power threats. First Nations people are leading the fight to a nuclear-free future, and our work is to support them in any way we can. And I was really lucky today to be at the First Nations Clean Energy Network conference that they were hosting down here in Walyalup in Fremantle, and there's just such amazing work that is happening within First Nations communities to try and make the transition work for them. So please, where you have the opportunity, support those efforts. We need to live this truth and not just acknowledge with our words. Action is needed to bring into reality a future where First Nations rights to self-determination is realised. Sovereignty was never ceded. This always was and always will be Aboriginal land. The aim of this event today is to provide context and information on the inquiry into nuclear energy generation and get as many submissions in as possible that are highlighting these concerns. We need to build this movement. Everyone that cares about future generations and the planet needs to become an anti-nuclear activist for now until the next election. So thanks for being here. Thanks for getting ready to write a submission. We're going to kick off. There's some really great speakers that will talk us through this process and give us a little bit of insight into what to include in our submissions. First up, we've got Dave Sweeney, who's going to talk about the current updates on the nuclear debate in Australia. And then Dr. Jim Green is going to give us some background information to the inquiry. And Scott Ludlam will talk us through what will happen to our submission after submitting it, and a little bit more about the parliamentary process. And Sana will walk through the pro forma. So there's a pro forma submission that makes it easy to put in a submission to this inquiry, and she'll walk us through this. And so by the end of today, we're hoping that you can hit send and put in your submission. No pressure, you can take a little bit longer if you want to edit, but definitely you can get the ball rolling today. So first up, I've got the pleasure of introducing the very wonderful Dave Sweeney, who's been active in mining resources and nuclear issues for decades. He's worked with media, trade unions, environment groups. He's been a great friend to us in the West. Thank you, Dave. He leads the Australian Conservation Foundation's Nuclear Free campaign and is a co-founder of the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, which was awarded the Nobel Prize in 2017. Thanks so much, Dave. Take it away.
Thanks, Mia. That's a lovely introduction, and thanks for that. Thanks for your work too. Good evening, everybody. Like Mia said, my name's Dave Sweeney, and I'm talking to you tonight from Boonwurrung country down in South Gippsland in Victoria. I notice people on this call from all over the country, and that's really important and really good because this is clearly a really significant national issue. One of the things that I've really noticed in working on nuclear issues, and particularly and with some of you on this call on radioactive waste issues, is that often there's an attempt by those who are pushing an activity to localise it, to turn it into a postcode focused local economic activity. And the framing is that there will be all sorts of benefits if the people of postcode whatever agree to this activity, and everyone else who's not in postcode whatever should stay away. And you have no right to have an opinion. It is these people, be it Kimber for radioactive waste, or Tennant Creek, or wherever it becomes a local economic issue that is framed in the beneficial sense and that others don't have a say in. Now, I represent and work with a national environment organisation, and we have a clear and strong and consistent nuclear-free or anti-nuclear position, because it doesn't matter where it is, whether you're mining, whether you're talking about imposition of waste on land, or whether you're talking about nuclear reactors at 7 sites. These are national considerations. They have lasting national intergenerational impacts and consequences. And so one of the things that I really want to say tonight, not just for tonight in the submission, but for this entire debate, because both major parties have said that the next federal election will be a referendum on nuclear power, is that this is a key issue for our country. We're at the crossroads now. We're at a time of choice. We can't keep burning coal. Coal will be over and out in 10 to 15 years. We have burnt coal as the mainstay of our electricity for 100 years. So it's a major time of change. And we, as the environment groups, are very clear and very unequivocal, not in picking favourites, but in choosing effective action on climate change. And that effective action is not adopting nuclear or going down the nuclear rabbit hole. And this is not a good faith solution that's being put forward by the coalition. It's a political tactic that is seeking to inject uncertainty into the funding and the future and the policy settings for renewables. It is seeking to extend coal, and it is seeking to cement and dramatically expand the role of gas in our future energy mix. Mia used the term that we all need to be anti-nuclear activists or nuclear-free activists for the next 6 months, and I think that's really critical. If your concern is climate, if you're active on fracking or gas campaigns, if you're active on coal campaigns, whatever that is, this isn't like a bespoke nuclear issue. This is a fundamental distractor to effective action on climate. So I think that is really clear. What's not clear is the detail of what the coalition are actively proposing. I know some people are working with some people in Gippsland Latrobe Valley who absolutely say, don't say plan. There is not a plan. A plan has details, it has sequence, it has costings. None of those things exist in relation to the coalition's ambition or scheme. We don't know those things, which are absolutely critical in making any measured adjustment. We don't know the sort of technology that they're talking about, the style of reactor, the cost of the reactor, the water consumption and how that would be met. We don't know full siting details. We don't know the proportion that nuclear power would be projected to supply to the national grid. We don't know what the proposal is, the costings, or the methodology for waste management. So at the risk of being a Donald Rumsfeld, there's a hell of a lot that we don't know. But what we do know is what I just said, that this is not a good faith solution or attempt to address the pressing challenge of climate change. And we're seeing it writ large every day in this country and around the world. It is really coming home. And the good news of this nuclear debate, if you like, is that there is a recognition that we can't have business as usual, that climate change is real. The bad news is that what is being actively pushed is an approach that would delay effective action and cement the industries that have been fueling climate change. We're already in this country 40% there with renewables. 40% of electricity in our country today is generated by renewables. 75% in South Australia, 100% in the ACT in Tasmania. So why would you change horses midstream? the CSIRO, Lazard Finances, so many independent bodies have said that the fastest, most assured way of advancing new energy generation is through renewables, or conversely, the slowest and most expensive way of new electricity generation is nuclear. So it's a very important time to send a very clear message to this inquiry. This inquiry came about on the last sitting day of the last parliamentary session, where Labor, in quite a surprise move, moved for a parliamentary committee, a House committee into domestic nuclear energy. It has a dozen terms of reference, and Jim Green will talk to some of them and is leading a joint environmental group response and has done excellent work on this. And Sana and Friends of the Earth and others, including ACF, have done work to outline and request their members and our members and supporters to contribute to this inquiry. And it's really important because we understand that the pro-nuclear side, some of the actors there are looking to do that Autobot approach to just try and flood a whole range of numbers. That's happening more and more with these inquiries. And then have a bums on seat and point and say, look, all these many thousands of Australians want nuclear power. The Albanese government's out of step. The critics are out of step. So we think it's really important, both of itself and also as part of that numbers game, that there is, as well as substantive submissions about the full detail content, really thoughtful and multiple individual submissions about what people think about our energy choices and our energy future. So hopefully, sometimes it seems a little bit like, well, why would we put an inquiry in? They're all politicians, no one listens, all of that stuff. This is a really key time right now, and it's a time when we can do an action that is that old sticker of better active today than radioactive tomorrow. We can insert our voice now and insert a sense of reason, a sense of responsibility, and a sense of staying the course on the most proven and effective way of addressing our energy challenge, which is the renewable transition. And so that's what I'd be asking you to do today, to recap, I suppose, that there is a strong national interest, dimension, and imperative to us wherever we are in this country engaging in this issue. Two is that we have every right and should not be constrained by, I don't know enough about the technology, I don't know enough about these issues. It seems quite scientific. It's a values-based thing as well as a technical thing. And the other point is that hopefully with the work that's been done by Jim and Sana and others to popularise and make possible, all of us on this call can put in a comment, a viewpoint, an expression, and all of us on this call can take that forward into our families, our friends, our networks, our workplaces, elsewhere, and just tap people on the shoulder and say, it's not too hard, just a few paragraphs. It makes a difference, because it really is a case of we need to keep our eyes on the prize of a renewable rollout, and we need to shut the door to all the nuclear risks that this industry brings. So I'll leave it there and hand it over to the folks that know the content. And just thank you for your attendance here tonight. Thank Don't Nuke the Climate crew for enabling this. Thank Jim Green for his leadership in driving a whole range of these things, and Sana and others in turning that detail into accessible, enabling things that enable us to all make a clear contribution for a clear and cleaner future. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, and thank you, Dave. And over to another powerhouse, former WA Green Senator Scott Ludlam. He served in Parliament from 2008 to 2017. We're very lucky to have him, and it's a little bit quieter on Nick since he left, and we miss him terribly, but very grateful that he's with us today and working on Don't Nuke the Climate, and also taking us behind the scenes a little bit into the parliamentary process. But before Scott was a senator, he was involved in the anti-nuclear movement in WA, inspired by the powerful leadership of the Mirror traditional owners up at Jabiluka in that fight against the Ranger uranium mine and Jabiluka mine. And in 1998, he joined the Nuclear Free Movement. Last year he published, or maybe it was 2 years or 3 years ago now even, he published his first book, Full Circle, which was a great read, highly recommend. And at the moment he's a writer, designer, freelance troublemaker based on unceded Yuin country in the south coast of New South Wales, and joining us online today. Thanks, Scott. Please take us through the parliamentary process.
Thanks so much, Mia. And it's really lovely to see everybody here. Yeah, I'm calling from unceded and stolen Yuin ground on the far south coast of New South Wales. Dave's just given us a really great background into why this one matters. I'm kind of here with some good news for people who maybe feel a bit jaded about the parliamentary process, and so we should, in that this one isn't a complete waste of everyone's time, because the majority of the committee that we're making our submissions to is on our side, looking for good arguments. They're going to read these submissions because this is a bit unusual. Often we find ourselves submitting an outrage to a horrific government proposal. This one's got a slightly different twist to it. It's a House committee, so we don't need to worry about senators. It's a select committee, so this is its only purpose. This is the whole reason this one exists. And it's been called by the government to kind of marshal arguments, I suppose, and to gather evidence for why the coalition's plan is a debacle. It's obviously got its kind of politicized side, but it is a really interesting and useful vehicle for us to show up the coalition. There's been all kinds of rumor that they're going to be using some kind of AI generator, or that they're just doing some kind of auto forward. They're all going to be the same submissions. As Dave said, and I really want to underline this, sometimes it is a numbers game because these submissions will get read. So I'll just talk you through how it works. Even if you're just going to put in a couple of pages, or one page is enough to make a difference in this instance. So we'll put links in the chat, and Sana's done a beautiful job of kind of lining up on a page that we can link to all the resources that you're going to need about how to make inquiries, how to make submissions to parliamentary inquiries. But the kind of key things you need to know: there's no such thing as too short. If it's name, address, reason why I'm opposed to this idea, that really helps. If it's 10 pages of considered like an impact statement on your community, if you're a local to one of these impact sites, that's incredibly valuable. So you write it up, you'll double check a page that we'll throw into the chat that just makes sure you've kind of dotted the I's and crossed the T's, and then you'll hit send, and it'll be addressed to the committee and off it will go. At that point, the committee owns the submission. So please don't publish it yourself. Don't chuck it on social media. Don't email it around to your mates. Until the committee decides to publish it, they kind of own it. And the reason for that is when your submission hits their table, the committee secretariat will open it up, they'll read it, they'll check to see if you've defamed anyone. So please don't, because that slows the process down. They'll check to see if there's anything else in there that might be legally privileged or confidential or weird. Very unlikely that there would be. And then they'll publish it on the committee's website. So the committee generally meets once a week. They'll publish the submissions on the committee's website. And at that point, two things happen. One is the submission's now public. You can circulate it. You can tell your mates, you can encourage other people to follow suit, and you can let people know what's there. And the second thing is, once that's gone on the APH, the Australian Parliament House website, it attracts parliamentary privilege, which means anybody from Peter Dutton to Westinghouse on down, nobody can come after you in a legal sense around defamation or anything else for information that you've provided to the Parliament in the course of its inquiry. So it's protected. And that's quite an important thing. What happens then is the committee's on its own timetable to produce what's called an interim report. Jim, you might remember off the top of your head exactly when it's due to table that. I think it's early next year, if I'm not mistaken. They've started drafting the thing already. They'll be taking all these submissions into account. The politicians don't necessarily have time. I know this one from experience. A lot of the opposition MPs, or maybe even the government backbenchers, they're not going to have time to read all the submissions. But the Secretariat will. They're going to be looking at each and every submission. They're going to be checking to see if there's anything new in each one. And they do two things. One is that they will help the chair of the committee, who in this case is a government MP, so he's likely to be reasonably favourable to arguments not in favour of the nuclear industry. They create what's called a chair's draft for the chair to read. And at that point, there's no politics in it. That's going to be straight up and down, factual draft document outlining, here's what submitters have said, here's a history of this issue, here's what Parliament might have done recently on this issue. They'll go back as far as the ban that John Howard introduced, I think in the late 1990s. So all that stuff is going to be there. And at the point where it goes onto the chair's desk, that's when the politics start to get introduced. The other thing that they'll do is that the committee secretariat will batch up all the incoming submissions, and they create a short brief for the MPs who, depending on your disposition, are either too lazy or too busy to read the submissions in detail. On their desk, when you see them in the hearings, they'll have a block of paper in front of each of them, if they're doing their jobs, which will summarise the nature of the submissions, and particularly any of the major witnesses who are giving evidence that day. They'll have a summary of their submission in front of them. And that's why it's important, and that's why Dave is so keen, and we're also keen to encourage you to make a submission, whether it be half a page or half a volume. It's all going to be worthwhile. A couple of weeks' time, the chair's going to have a draft in front of them. The Christmas break and all that is going to interrupt things, but the process will roll out as it usually does, where a chair's draft, which is going to be very favourable to the government and hopefully the crossbenchers' position and hopefully ours position, that'll be circulated to other committee members, at which point Dutton's team will start working, we presume, on a minority report or what's called a dissenting report, i.e. they disagree with all the submissions that we're going to be drafting tonight. They think the government's on the wrong track, and they think it would be a great idea to keep coal and gas in the system for decades longer and plunge us even further into a climate emergency. So that's going to be the nature of the opposition's minority report, but we can feel fairly safe that the majority report of the committee is going to reflect our views. So a couple of quick pointers. Make sure you invite the committee to make particular recommendations. You can say, I would like the committee to recommend that we never, ever build nuclear power stations in this country. You can also be a bit more creative. Is there any information you think the committee should ask for from the coalition or from the lunatics who have suggested this unbelievable sabotage of national energy policy? The committee should request of the Dutton opposition some costings, some international experience. It should actually require them to produce the evidence that's been so lacking in this debate so far. So we know it's going to be used in a politicised way. On the day that the draft report, which I don't think the opposition will then get to land their minority or their dissenting report, so the airwaves are going to be reasonably clear for our side of the argument, we hope. It will get waved around, it will get on television, and all of us at that point can help, back it up, raise our voices, make sure that people know that we were involved in crafting this thing, that it's the parliamentary process working as it's intended. And then what we will end up with, 2/3 or 3/4 of the way through the election cycle, is a pretty handy block of evidence. It'll be referenced, it'll be written by intelligent people, and yes, it'll have a kind of a layer of political opinion layered over the top of it. But the core of these reports are often really valuable. And as you heard when Dave was speaking, it's drawn some of the brightest people in the country to put their best arguments to the committee. So what often comes out of these things is you'll get a list of submissions. You'll be able to go through those and say, oh, I wonder what those people think of this issue. You end up with this really interesting little compendium of the current state of play, the current state of the debate, submitted by all points of the compass as far as the debate's concerned. But among those will be a lot of people who we can trust and who are reliable. So I reckon that's it from me. I'll hop back onto mute. Thanks again. It's really lovely to see such good numbers on the call tonight. And we look forward to seeing the submissions roll in. Thanks again.
Thanks so much, Scott. That was great, really, really useful and concise. And my favourite quote that is now on the public record is from Matt Keane, the chair of the Climate Change Authority and former New South Wales Liberal Energy Minister, who told the inquiry this week, "There is no bigger rent-seeking parasite than the nuclear industry." That's my favourite so far. Keen to hear more and keen to see what you all write. we've changed the order around a little bit. We're going to save Jim for when you're ready to start typing, and the very wonderful Sana is up next. Sana is part of the Don't Nuclear Climate campaign, and she's also the Nuclear Free Collective Coordinator at Friends of the Earth in Melbourne. She's got a Master's in Peace and Conflict Studies, and she's been working with First Nations communities about uranium and all things nuclear, and has been an active member of the Australian Nuclear Free Alliance. And Sana has been doing a stellar job with Don't Nuclear Climate and keeping things ticking over, and has put together some really useful opportunities and ways that we can put in inquiries, put in submissions to this inquiry. So she's going to talk us through that, and please feel free to share those with your friends and family after this call, and I'll hand over to Sana. Thank you, and thank you so much, Scott.
Thanks so much, Mia. I'm calling in from Wurundjeri Woiwurrung land. That was never ceded, and I just want to preface this by saying, like, for putting in a submission, some people have done that a lot, and it's not a big deal. For people that don't do that very often, like me, it's a bit daunting. But luckily we've got people that have done the research for decades on this, and that can help with this. So that's why we created with Friends of the Earth a little pro forma format. Of course, we don't want everybody to hand in the same thing, but there are some really good points on it. And in my one, I just said I used Dr. Jim Green's points to like go further into detail after I did my own little spiel, just to make sure that there is all the detail and reasoning that you would have read. So it's got a lot of points here that Jim has talked about, and Jim will come after my little walk through here and talk more on the specific points, and you can also ask him questions that you want to clarify. So there's a lot of text, and the idea is that at the top, the important is why do you feel strongly about this? Why do you care? How would it impact your life? And I know there's people on this call that are living in the communities that are proposed for nuclear energy, but it could also be, you know, like if they build a nuclear power plant in the Latrobe Valley here, if an accident happens in Melbourne, we're also not safe. So it definitely affects all of us. It also affects people that are around uranium mines and nuclear waste dumps and all the towns that it travels through. And the plumes of fallout are also huge. So I guess this is a matter, like Dave said, that concerns all of us. And so please take some time to like delete the stuff that's in cap letters, and just write at least a paragraph or two about why you care about this. Why is it important? It will affect the coming generation. So if you're worried about your children and grandchildren and the next 3,000 generations stuck with any nuclear waste, please fill that in. So this is basically, you just fill it at the top. You just fill in your postcode and your details. Don't have to fill in your phone number if you don't want to. And you can also say, don't send me updates. If you don't want to get any updates, and at the end it will automatically sign off with your name on it. So pretty straightforward. Also feel free to delete some of the stuff that you find less relevant, for example, so that they don't all look the same, or feel free to keep it all in there. And I guess one of the things that I was thinking would be really helpful is, now that you've gone through this and we've got a recording in a minute as well, having like a little get together within your community and walking people through this would be really helpful as well. So let's multiply this after tonight. And I think that is it. I'm going to stop sharing, and then I'm going to hand it back to Mia, and Jim will give us some information on the content.
Great. Thanks so much, Sana. And yeah, we can share links and everything with you here in the chat for you to use. And I will, go straight over to Dr. Jim Green, who is the National Nuclear Free Campaigner with Friends of the Earth Australia and a member of the Nuclear Consulting Group. former editor of the Nuclear Monitor newsletter published by the World Information Service on Energy and Nuclear Information and Resource Service. He has an honours degree in public health and a doctorate in science and technology for his thesis on the debates over the replacement of Australia's nuclear research reactor. Jim is also what I refer to as the brains trust in the nuclear free movement around nuclear power reactors, and so we often rely so much on his knowledge and research and very diligent tracking of things. So we're really lucky and grateful for Jim to put this together and take us through some really critical points for us to understand and think through in this inquiry. Thanks, Jim, and thanks, Sana.
Thanks, Mia, and thanks, Sana and Dave. Firstly, I would like to acknowledge the Kaurna traditional owners here in South Australia who were engaged in a process called the letters patent process 200 years ago, and that had some promise, but they were shafted, and they've been seeking justice ever since, and that justice remains elusive. Also, before I get into my talk, for those of you who don't know, Donald Trump has definitely won the US election. And as shocking as that is, well, it is shocking for so many reasons. And I don't mean to make light of something so shocking, but he was making comments critical about nuclear power just a couple of days ago. And I think also the progress of the AUKUS nuclear submarine project also becomes more complicated. So those would be some positives from a disastrous outcome. And also, before getting into the substance of people's submissions or our submission to the inquiry, there are heaps of hearings. There's a long list of them up on the parliamentary website. They've got a dozen hearings or so just in the next 6 weeks in Queensland, ACT, Victoria, South Australia, New South Wales, WA. I've never known a parliamentary inquiry to do so many hearings, but they are, and that's great. But it also puts some more pressure on us. I think if you feel that you could put your hand up to speak at one of these hearings of the parliamentary inquiry, then just note that at the top of your submission, or note that in your cover letter to your submission, or both. And you know, they're going to need people to be willing to front up to the public hearings, and it's important to do so. And if you feel uneasy about that prospect, well, please put your hand up anyway, and we would be very happy to give you whatever support you need to do a good contribution to a public hearing. So I'm just going to run through the terms of reference very quickly. And one of the frustrations with these public inquiries is that they often have stupid terms of reference. They're including things that shouldn't be included, or it's completely unclear what they're after, or they're excluding things that should be included. And the terms of reference for this inquiry, they're not too bad, but there is one major omission, which is that they don't invite people to talk about the increased carbon emissions that will inevitably result from the coalition's nuclear/energy plans. So I'm just putting in a link to a Friends of the Earth webpage where you can get all that information. And even though it doesn't fit neatly within the terms of reference, well, please just make sure to include some points about that. It's very clear that the coalition's plans will increase carbon emissions, and that seems to be a feature rather than a bug. So just to very quickly run through the terms of reference, deployment time frames. The coalition insists that nuclear could be up and running within 10 years from now, but in reality, it would be a miracle if nuclear reactors were operating 20 years from now. I think it's much more likely that even if the Dutton coalition won the next election, it would be more like 25 to 30 years, but certainly 20 is an absolute bare minimum. Also keep in mind, this isn't for your submission, but if the coalition does win the next election, one way to block their nuclear plan is that it simply gets blocked in the Senate, which is great, it saves us a lot of work, but what we can't block is their plan to derail the renewable energy transition and to give a vast amount of political support and taxpayer funds to the fossil fuel industries. So, and that gets back to the earlier point about a blowout in carbon emissions, but, you know, 10 years for nuclear power is just absurd. The second term of reference is fuel supply and transport of fuel. You know, it's really unclear what on earth they're talking about here, but one of the issues they might be hinting at is that the idea that Australia is one of the world's leading uranium producers and exporters, and that gives us a lead in the nuclear power game. It gives us a strategic advantage or a competitive advantage. But it's obvious, it's certainly not true. Australia has uranium mines and uranium reserves, but we don't have any of the other front-end nuclear fuel cycle facilities, namely uranium conversion facilities and enrichment plants and fuel fabrication facilities. So if we were going down this nuclear path, we would be exporting the uranium to one country for uranium conversion, probably to a second country for enrichment, probably to a third country for fuel fabrication, and then we would be importing the fuel elements back to Australia. Uranium enrichment capability, some of the same points apply there. Australia has no competitive advantage or strategic advantage. One of the interesting and disturbing features of this debate is that the coalition, and in particular Shadow Energy Minister Ted O'Brien, is saying that for strategic reasons, Australia should develop a whole gamut of nuclear fuel cycle facilities. And it's not even remotely obvious what he means by strategic reasons, but some people would read that as being a hint that Australia should move closer to a nuclear weapons capability, keeping in mind that uranium enrichment provides a direct pathway to explosive materials for nuclear weapons. And specifically, if you've got an enrichment plant, you can produce highly enriched uranium, which is the feedstock for many nuclear weapons, including the bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima back in 1945. There's a less sinister explanation, and again, this comes from Ted O'Brien, which he said he's saying that there's going to be a massive expansion of nuclear power in Australia's region, namely Southeast Asia, and that Australia should have some control and some influence over that, and we would be better placed to do that if we have nuclear fuel cycle facilities. Well, there's 0 nuclear power reactors in Southeast Asia, and there's not likely to be any in the foreseeable future. So it's nonsense. Waste management, transport and storage. Well, I won't go over these issues in any detail. I'm sure many of you know that successive efforts to establish a national nuclear waste dump in Australia have been defeated by community campaigns led by Aboriginal traditional owners. And congratulations to those mobs, the Cooper-Pedy Kungajuda and the Muckaty traditional owners and the Adnyamatna and most recently the Bungala traditional owners. It's been just extraordinary and scarcely believable that they've won all those campaigns against federal governments which have all the power and all the resources. I think probably the only other point I'll make in relation to waste is this circular argument that we will need nuclear waste facilities for AUKUS nuclear submarines, and that therefore solves the problem of nuclear waste for nuclear power reactors. You could just as easily argue the opposite, which is that we're going to need nuclear waste facilities for Peter Dutton's nuclear power reactors, and therefore the question of nuclear waste management for AUKUS nuclear submarines is solved. They're very cute circular arguments, but they don't get around some basic facts, which is that Australia has no national facilities for the disposal or storage of short-lived or intermediate level waste. No country in the world has an operating deep underground repository for high-level nuclear waste. There is one deep underground repository for intermediate level waste. It's in the United States, and an underground nuclear waste barrel at that facility exploded 10 years ago because of staggering mismanagement and staggering under-regulation. And you would expect a lot better from the United States, but they failed, resulting in an explosion of an underground nuclear waste barrel. Water use, I'm glad they included this term of reference because it gets too little attention. Nuclear power is incredibly thirsty. A single reactor, a conventional 1,000 megawatt reactor, consumes 36 to 65 million litres of water per day. And that equates to 13 to 23 billion litres per year. And that very sharply limits the number of siting options for nuclear power reactors in Australia, and it mostly limits those options to coastal sites. And even on coastal sites, you get all sorts of problems with these massive water intake pipes, which just suck up and kill marine life by the tons, literally by the tons. Occasionally, they even suck up human beings. Some of them have lived to speak to the experience. But anyway, in the pro forma submission, you can read more about that, and it's good to comment on it. Relevant energy infrastructure capability, including brownfield sites and transmission lines. Well, it's so vague. I don't really want to go into that. We could ramble on about it for hours, but just one point is that the coalition insists that we need 28,000 kilometres of new transmission lines to support the rollout of renewable energy. It's just a blatant lie, and no matter how many times they're called out on it, they just continue to repeat this blatant lie. And it's very Trumpian, I think. They know that it's untrue, they don't care, and they continue to lie. And for the facts of that matter, just please see the pro forma submission. Legal and policy frameworks. Well, there's federal legal bans, state legal bans on the East Coast. There are legal bans in a bunch of states for uranium enrichment and other nuclear fuel cycle activities. And as I mentioned briefly before, one scenario is the coalition wins the next election, but their nuclear power plans don't go any further than an obstructive Senate which blocks it. And there are these state legislation bans as well. Risk management for natural disasters or any other safety concerns. Again, we could talk about this forever, but I won't. I don't want to. There's the issue of seismic risks or earthquake risks, which has been very topical because of some serious earthquakes around at least a couple of the sites proposed for nuclear reactors. If you read the pro forma comments, it talks about Fukushima and, this very small risk of a very catastrophic accident, but it can't be discounted. And if there is a very catastrophic accident, it will be very catastrophic. And we've got some facts and figures in there from the Fukushima disaster. 190,000 evacuees, and very few of them have been able to return to their homes. Costs of around $1 trillion. But I'll move on there. Next term of reference, potential share of total energy mix. Well, Australia's up to, in the national electricity market, we're up to 40%. The government's target is 82% by 2030. If you read the information coming from the Australian Energy Market Operator, we're looking at 90+% not long after that. So the guts of this whole energy debate for Australia is how do you get that remaining small fraction that can't be met from renewables? And some answers for that are natural gas, biogas, hydrogen, more storage capacity. There's no real scenario where nuclear makes sense for that. Nuclear would be incredibly expensive. It would be more risky than the other options. Necessary land acquisition. the coalition is already threatening to use compulsory acquisition powers to seize land for these nuclear power reactors, which is highly undemocratic. The next two terms of reference concern cost, and I won't go through them. I'm sure many of you or all of you have got some sense that nuclear power is incredibly expensive. And the last term of reference is any other relevant matter. And the ones that I'm planning to include for the joint environment group submission are weapons proliferation, social license, and in particular First Nations peoples who have been shat on for so long by the nuclear industry and by governments in support of the nuclear industry, but who have resisted and successfully resisted so many nuclear waste dump proposals. And the last one that I'm planning to include is the future is renewable, not radioactive. And you just look at the worldwide figures, and it's just been astonishing. The nuclear industry has been stagnant for 20 plus years, and for renewables, the costs have plummeted and the growth has been staggering. And currently renewables are up to 30%, 30+%, and renewables have shrunk to 9%. And even the conservative International Energy Agency expects the renewables to reach 46% by the year 2030. So it's clear that the coalition is backing the wrong horse, and they're doing so for ideological reasons. And it makes no sense whatsoever. And I will stop there and hand it back to you. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Jim. So much knowledge, and Jim's got really just so many resources that are available through Don't Mix the Climate and Friends of the Earth Australia. If you need more or want some written words, and there's that wonderful pro forma where a lot of that information that Jim just talked through is, so you can adapt from there. So yeah, that's kind of the presentations that we have planned, and we're open now for any questions or answers that you might have specific about the inquiry. So you can pop them in the chat or raise your hand. Thanks, Wendy. Do you want to kick us off with a question?
I do. There's two questions I've got, and that's in regard to if you make a joint statement or joint submission and your different organisations, and then you might make one with a different organisation again, can you make a personal one? And Scott may have been the one to answer that. So can you make, like, can your name be on several different ones because you are different organisations and things like that? The other question I've got, and Scott did say it, but I just want to sort of highlight it in the sense that many think that a submission is really hard work. They just can't do it. There's a pro forma there, but a submission, from my understanding, a submission counts even if you say, I am Wendy Farmer from Latrobe Valley. I am really concerned about the risk of nuclear and I don't want it in my region. Thank you. And submit, you know, so the official stuff on it, and the reason why that is still counted as a submission against nuclear. Is that correct?
Yeah, yes to both of those questions, Wendy. It's fine to have your name on a number of different submissions. And yes, if all you do is sign the pro forma, then it won't be counted as a unique submission. They'll just say that they've received however many hundred pro forma submissions. But if you just add a paragraph or two at the top, then it's likely to be included as a unique submission. So that's why it's good to include a paragraph or two at the top.
And if you don't use a pro forma and just write a very one paragraph, 2 paragraphs of why you don't want nuclear, will be a unique submission.
Yep.
So it's easy. We can encourage people. It's easy to do.
Easy, no excuses.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
Thanks, Wendy and Jim. There's another question in the chat from Michelle saying, is it essential to follow the terms of references?
No, I meant to mention that, Mia, when I was rambling on, but you know, some of them are a bit vague and it won't be at all clear to you what on earth they're talking about. But so just feel very, very welcome to ignore the terms of reference that you don't want to speak on or to write about. It's no problems whatsoever.
I think I've got a hand up from Brenda.
Hi, I just wanted to ask about the inquiry, getting a seat at the inquiry, and does anybody know whether they have a standard number of seats? And you know, I don't live in Collie, but I live in the southwest, but I'd be willing to go to Collie for it unless there was a big mob down from Perth for it, which I would imagine you would be going down, Mia. But you know, is it the more the merrier? Shall I just write that I'm willing in my submission, and they might give me a seat or they might not? Yep. Okay.
Yeah, definitely, Brenda, because the reality is in some of these places, I think they're going to be struggling to find people who are willing to front up. So it's much to our advantage if we're putting our hands up and offering to speak at these hearings. So yeah, please do.
And I'll be trying to promote it through the Southwest Greens as well to get people who do live as close as possible to do a submission and say they're willing to come as well. I'll do my best in the next week.
Thanks,
Okay.
Brenda. And just a little value add if people are doing that, particularly in the Southwest where the federal member is Rick Wilson. He sent out an email to his constituents saying, please send your submission to me as well. I'm keen to hear. And I think it would be good to value add by sending to some of those MPs, particularly where there might be open or influenced by that local opposition to this plan. So I think that value add a bit there. There's a question from Steve about confidentiality or privacy. Do we know if there's an option in the submissions where you can say, please keep me anonymous?
Yeah, there definitely is. It's made very clear if you want to keep your submission anonymous for some reason or other.
And, yeah, are there any more questions? Oh yeah, Gillian.
I'm just wondering, I hadn't heard that there was going to be an inquiry at Collie, and I'm just wondering how many other inquiries there are.
Thanks. I might hand over to Dave. Do you have that list in front of you? I know Perth is, I think, on the 16th of December and Collie's on the 17th, but there is a list of other areas. So it's actually, I think it's on the chat. Somebody's put a link to the actual website where you can go and check. But Dave, yeah.
There is in the chat, there is a link to the website, and there is a section on the website, a line on the website, public hearings, and you'd click on that and it opens it up. But there are a range of hearings. There's Billawheeler and Nanango in Queensland, the Queensland proposed sites on the 13th and 14th of November. On the 15th is Brisbane. They're moving along pretty sprightly. On Monday, the 18th of November, they're in Canberra. And then there's a busy week in the start of December with Terrelgan in the Latrobe Valley in Victoria on the 3rd of December, and Melbourne on the 4th of December, and Adelaide on the 5th, and Port Augusta on the 6th. And then on 10 and 11 and 12 December, it's Muswellbrook, Lithgow, and Sydney. So quite busy. And then finishing up with 16 December is Collie, and 17 December is Perth. Now, all of those are on this site, They're on the inquiry's website. It's really worth having a look, because I think it's when that show does come to town, be that a big town, the capital city of the state, or the regional area, there's significant media opportunities, there's significant opportunity and profile to make some noise and make it really clear that we don't want it. So check that out and do what you can to either participate or have a presence at that time. There's also just a couple of other quick thoughts. There's as well as the hearings in the next month or 5 weeks, there's an opportunity, and not everyone can get to the hearings, but could do things like write a letter to the local and state paper at the time the hearing is happening. All those things matter. It's about generating an awareness that there's a lot of people in Australia that don't want to see this happen. The other thing that's happening in the next couple of weeks is the COP, the big UN conference, Climate on Parties, in Baku in Azerbaijan. There will be a big international nuclear industry push there. There will be plenty of Australian pro-nuclear voices. There are some people going from Australia to put very strongly the counter view. That includes myself and Karina Lester, who's a powerhouse First Nation woman from Northern South Australia, second generation nuclear test survivor. We'll be working with others in the international Don't Nuke the Climate movement to convey that nuclear is not a credible or effective climate response, and we want a future that's renewable, not radioactive. But at the time of COP, when there is commentary in that, letters in the paper and social media, reposts and comments are all very helpful. The other thing I just close with is that ACF ahead of the election is getting some core flutes made up, that our energy future is renewable, not radioactive. I'll put my email in the chat, and anyone who wants to get some of those to give out, to have on their house, on their fence, or to put around, give us a shout, and they will, when I'm back and landed again, make their way to you. So there's, I think, just any opportunity for profile and contest in the next period is really helpful.
There's a Don't Nuke the Climate event on Monday, the 18th, around the COP29 forum in Baku, and there'll be details on our social media. So if you follow Don't Nuke the Climate on Facebook or Instagram, or look on our website, which is don'tnuketheclimate.com.au, you'll be able to get those details. There's also a webinar coming up on Wednesday, the 20th of November, on the health impacts of radiation in the workplace with Ian Felly. So for those of you that are living in communities where there's the prospect of a nuclear reactor, and you might know workers that are transitioning to a new industry, that might be a really useful one to suggest to some local folks, understanding the health risks and impacts of radiation. And then for more resources, please have a look at Don't Nuke the Climate, which is where there's myth-busting resources. There's like links to a great publication, Let the Facts Speak, which has an encyclopedia of all the nuclear incidents and accidents up to 2012. There's the World Industry Nuclear Status Report, which there's a whole heap of, there's just so much information there. So anything you need, really, it's on Don't Nuke the Climate. You can also tune into the Radioactive Show on 3CR. Can get that as a podcast if you're not in Melbourne, which covers lots of the latest nuclear and peace issues. You can also check out the Australian Conservation Foundation nuclear site, and there's a great report that Jim and Dave have worked on there with some of the latest details. Or Power Gains Assessing Coal to Nuclear Proposals in Australia, Cost, Timing, Consent and Other Constraints, and that's really will be really helpful for this submission writing process. But yes, please write submissions, tell your friends, get as many people as possible to write, and please do include invite yourself to come to the public hearings. They'll be really important moments. Write to local media, write to your local members. This is a key time to amplify and make a lot of noise, and particularly in the communities and the regions where we need to really amplify those voices as much as we can.